All right, so our next speaker is Melissa Soto. Melissa is originally from Florida and is a passionate marine conservationist. Before attending Scripps, she communicated marine issues through articles and other media outlets for marine science organizations in South Florida. Over the past few years, her passion for local food systems has expanded and now includes seafood landed and served in San Diego. Melissa's project, as I see it, has sort of built on past Capstone projects that have been done by previous cohorts in the MAS program, and that's something I really love about it. She sort of looked at what was out there, started from where they left off, and decided to just dive in and take a really hard look at seafood in San Diego. And it's been really neat to see her carve out that space on a project that is place-based. It's where we live. It's where we all live right now, even if it's temporary for some of us. And it's just critical. I mean, I've wondered myself, coming from other places, why don't we see the same kind of emphasis on local seafood here in San Diego that I have in some of the other places I've lived, like San Francisco or Portland? So it's a really critical question and just so timely. And it's been really neat to see her just dive in headfirst into this issue and take a hard look at a question that I know I myself have been wondering too. So please join me in welcoming Melissa Soto.
Okay, hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for coming to today's symposium. To begin, I'd like to ask a few questions to the audience. So, how many of you eat seafood? Okay, so say like 95% of the room. Now, how many of you that eat seafood when dining out at restaurants in San Diego? Still pretty high, like 70. Okay, now for the ones that just raised their hand, do you know the origin of the seafood you're eating when dining out at restaurants? Raise your hand if you know the origin. Oh, got like 3. Okay, so not as many as any of us would hope, right? So, like many of you who raised your hand, I too love eating seafood. And over the past 4 years, I have been very interested and have taken an effort in knowing the origin of what I'm consuming, whether it be vegetables, meat, or most importantly, seafood. I'm always curious to know the ocean where the seafood I am eating has come from. So please join me on this journey to discover, has San Diego achieved ocean to plate? The purpose of my project was to determine if what is caught and landed locally in San Diego is being served in the city's seafood restaurants. Where in the world does U.S. seafood go? U.S. fish and seafood exports are distributed to many countries, but in 2016, the top 5 export destinations were Asia at 56%, Europe at 25%, North America at 17%, Oceania and South America both at 1%, and Africa at less than 1%. Most of our seafood that is caught and landed here in San Diego is almost immediately exported abroad to other countries for either processing or consumption. Many countries abroad have less expensive processing labor fees, and it may be exported there for that or for consumption or even shipped back to the US market. The total dollar value for edible and non-edible fisheries export products in the United States for 2016 was $8,067,165. Yeah, crazy. The U.S. imports seafood from 136 countries. The top suppliers in 2016 were Asia at 59%, North America again at 17%, South America at 14%, Europe at 7%, Oceania at 2%, and Africa at 1%. Based on the 2 slides, there seems to be a great connection between the United States and Asia for the import and export of our seafood. The total dollar value of edible and non-edible fishery products for imports in the United States for 2016 was $6,111,172. Some can say we are ultimately downgrading our seafood supply by consuming much of our seafood from abroad and taking part in this international fish swap. Even though the seafood we are consuming is mainly from abroad, Americans as a whole have been eating more seafood now than ever before. According to NOAA, in 2015, Americans were consuming 15.5 pounds of fish and shellfish, which was a 0.9 pound increase than the previous year. Seafood consumers have turned to restaurants as their fairground into the seafood world, but is the seafood we're eating domestic or imported? Many Americans would like to see an increase in the variety of seafood offered when dining out at seafood restaurants, and they'd rather it be wild than farm-raised. Restaurants provide the expertise and selection in the preparation of seafood consumers are looking for. Restaurants are an essential part for the local food system here in San Diego and can increase the demand for local, fresh, sustainable seafood. Similarly, as it has been done with other products such as produce, beers, and wine. Tourists and locals alike turn to seafood restaurants for new foods and trends. Restaurants have a role in shaping people's attitudes and can even change their impressions on consuming local seafood and even increase the consumption of diverse species. Some benefits of eating local are supporting the local food system, bolstering the economy and increasing the number of local jobs, and consumption of diverse species. Seafood consumption is on the rise, and consumers are demanding more seafood when dining out. As the demand for seafood in restaurants surges, so does the interest in local, sustainable, and fresh seafood. According to surveyors Loesch and Michelson, American consumers believe seafood is an important part of their health and nutrition, but they also want peace of mind to know where it has come from. Seafood restaurants have the opportunity to be the uniting factor between local, sustainable, and fresh seafood. If restaurants take the leadership role in sourcing locally caught seafood, consumers who are interested in the origin will be able to determine where it's from and then be able to make the executive call if to eat it or not. Domestic seafood is important to the economy and this area of San Diego in regards to heritage, as it has been generally well managed and responsibly sourced. Fishermen have increasingly taken charge of their sales and promotion through direct sales and outreach, such as fishermen's markets and off-the-boat sales. It is crucial to understand the origin of our seafood in restaurants because it allows consumers to make an executive decision, as well as assist in the development of local food system, which in turn assists producers and consumers. The goal of my project was to improve the understanding of the availability of San Diego sourced seafood within the city's seafood restaurants in order to inform local food system planning, local seafood marketing, and consumer choices. The objectives of my project were to define and document the distribution of different types of restaurants, determine the availability of locally sourced seafood in the city's seafood restaurants throughout the city, and to test for potential geographic and demographic influences on observed distributions and local seafood availability. The first step of this project was to identify all seafood restaurants within the city of San Diego, as well as demographic and spatial data based on the zip code the restaurants fell in order, or using city websites, Google's, and Yelp. Then, for the purposes of this project, San Diego restaurant was defined as any restaurant in San Diego that self-identified as a seafood restaurant or was categorized as a seafood restaurant by these search engines. The next step was to contact the seafood purchasers at the seafood restaurants to determine the frequency and availability of San Diego landed seafood, and this was done by a survey I created and was administered over the phone or in person or both at some point. But then for the purposes of this project as well, San Diego landed seafood was defined as seafood that was landed in San Diego County by commercial fishermen licensed within San Diego. And the results. So 145 restaurants fit the criteria of a seafood restaurant here in San Diego, and out of those 145, 62 responded to the survey. So I looked at the ownership of these restaurants, and 57.2% of them were individually owned, 17.9% were national chains, 13.1% were local chains, 7.58% regional, and 4.1% were international chains. And then I looked at the price range that these restaurants were listed under. So the most common was the $2 price range at 62.8%, and the least common was the $4 signs at 0.68%. And the way that this is explained is Yelp explains a dollar sign as the approximate price of a meal plus a drink, tax and tip. So the $1 was anything under $10, $2 sign was $11 to $30, $3 signs was $31 to $60, and $4 signs was anything $61 and above. And then so far, the most common were individually owned at the $2 price range. So is local seafood being served in the restaurants? Of the 62 respondents, 19.4 consistently carried San Diego landed seafood, and for the purposes of this presentation, consistent meant that one or more San Diego landed species was served at a restaurant throughout the average year, and 17.7% were occasionally, meaning that one or more species was also served in the restaurant at a given point throughout the year. Now, 53.2%, which is over half of the restaurants surveyed, never served San Diego landed seafood, and the remaining 9.6 of the restaurants were completely unsure of where their seafood came from. I know. And then it's scary. Then the proportion of restaurants that participated and stated that they consistently or occasionally carried San Diego landed seafood also tended to decrease with the distance from the coast. Most of the participating restaurants that carried San Diego landed seafood at least occasionally were located in a zip code that was adjacent to the coastline at 0 kilometers to the coast, and all but one occurred in 2 kilometers from the coast. Then all of the restaurants that participated that never served San Diego landed seafood ranged between 0 and 18 kilometers from the coast. The density of seafood restaurants tended to increase with the median per capita income, so restaurants along the coast tended to be in higher income areas. And then the green dot at the top represents downtown San Diego, which is an outlier, which therefore can have a greater potential to expand on serving locally landed seafood. As the results above display, seafood here is mainly not from San Diego. So 12.16% came from New England at the #1 spot, followed by somewhere in the Pacific Ocean at 9.8%, then Baja California and Alaska both at 9.4%, Asia at 9.02%, and finally in 6th place, San Diego at 8.24%. So the question is, has San Diego achieved ocean to plate? And the answer is only slightly. 53.2% of the participating restaurants never serve locally landed seafood, 18% occasionally do, and a little over 19% consistently do. The information provided by this study provides a quick glance at what is being served in the city's seafood restaurants. The seafood restaurants who did carry locally landed seafood were also limited to 2 kilometers from the coast. So what does this really mean? Of the participating surveys, 19% consistently served locally landed seafood, and 29% were individually owned restaurants. While locally landed seafood seems to be a bit low elsewhere, individually owned restaurants may be the best agents of change. They have the ability to be flexible and make changes to their menu and what they serve, as they are not under corporate authority and can be flexible. This does not mean that other restaurants can't change, but the individually owned ones are a good place to start for the purposes of outreach. So what can you do as a seafood consumer? First, ask questions. When dining out at restaurants, ask where it came from. You can ask the waiter, you can ask the manager, the chef, and if they respond that it was local, make sure you understand the definition of local. Some people here will say, oh yeah, it's local, it's from Japan. Well, that's not exactly local, so make sure it's from San Diego. And secondly is eat local first. There are a lot of restaurants here that do serve only San Diego landed seafood, or at least try to as often as possible. And by doing this and paying to eat at these restaurants, it shows the restaurant industry as a whole that you guys, seafood consumers, are interested in knowing where your seafood has come from, and it also shows that you're demanding some form of transparency. And then lastly, I hope to create an app that basically seafood consumers can go to restaurants and add what they're eating in real time, and just keep this record of this restaurant serving this salmon that came from this location, and they're saying it's farmed raised or wild, and any of that. And then I also hope to become a consultant to assist restaurants who are in transition to making their menus more local. I would like to thank my committee, Dr. Talley, Dr. Mesnick, Dr. Peterson, Oriana Dexter, my amazing class for this year, and all of the participating surveys, because without them it wouldn't have been possible, and my family and friends. Thank you. Questions? Okay.
I think the app sounds like an amazing follow-up and continuation of your project. Will there be, you probably haven't fully flushed it out, but
No.
it would be so cool also if there was a map because I would like to have a map of all of the restaurants that you surveyed or that to be local first.
Yeah.
And that you could actually use the app to also find the restaurants that you want to go to.
That's a great idea to add those, for sure.
I would pay $1.99 for that.
I'll give it to you for free, Kelsey.
Melissa, are you familiar with Surfrider Foundation's Ocean Friendly Restaurants?
Not extensively, but
Okay.
you can tell me.
Maybe we can have a conversation about it offline, but they have a system for certifying ocean-friendly restaurants. It's in terms of reducing plastic waste.
Okay.
They don't talk about local seafood in what they have available so far, and I feel like this would be just such a great match. And they have, I don't know if they have an app, but they've got a website that has a map that's very much like Yelp, where you can search by location. And I just feel like what you're doing would be such a valuable like collaboration with the work that they have going on. So it's Surfrider Ocean Friendly Restaurants is what the program's called.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you. So it seems that there are at least a few sort of local, or a few initiatives where we're trying to promote local consumption of local product, like the Seaport Village Saturday morning sales, Catalina Offshore, Point Loma Seafoods, things like that, where I think they really promote it. So is the issue here more of like there's not the supply to meet the demand, or is there supply but it immediately leaves town and doesn't even hit the ground in San Diego?
I think it's a mixture based on what I've learned, and my chair, Dr. Talley, did a previous seafood market study, but I think first it has to do with consumer preference. People are pretty stuck in their ways of eating seafood, and as NOAA has recorded, the top 3 most common seafood to consume are tuna, shrimp, and salmon. And although those species are caught in San Diego, they're seasons just like any other thing. So I think people just get stuck. Secondly, I think people are a little weary of trying new seafood if they're uncertain how to prepare it or what part of the food or the fish they can eat, let's say. So I think that's why it's great if they turn to seafood restaurants who are serving, local seafood of Opa or, how do I eat uni, right? So I think that has to do with it. Also, I'm from Miami and we don't have any type of Tuna Harbor dockside Saturday morning where, okay, what was caught is sold. And I think that's really great. I think maybe just amplifying it somehow and really connecting the fishermen with these restaurants, because the fishermen, I feel like, are doing an incredible job selling what they're catching. I think there's just a disconnect in getting it to the seafood, to the restaurant side. And a lot of the times, some of the restaurant managers I've spoken to believe it's a bit more expensive to serve local seafood. Well, that's not completely true, so.
Do you have a plan for sharing these findings with the restaurants that you interviewed and even some of the ones that you approached that maybe didn't take the survey? It seems like it would be really interesting information for them to have.
Yeah, I think that is a great idea. I hadn't thought about even sending it to the ones who didn't participate, but in reality, that would probably be the best to give it to people that need to see what's going on and that there is room, especially if they're individually owned. Yeah.
I still have the mic, so I'm going to ask one more question.
Take it.
So I didn't see a slide on this. I think you might have mentioned it, but I just wanted to clarify. So I know you said there was a correlation between locally owned independent restaurants and likelihood of serving local seafood. Did you also find a correlation between proximity from the coast with likelihood to serve local seafood?
Yeah, it tended to fall within like 2 kilometers of the coast where most of the seafood restaurants were, and then that's for the ones who participated. Yeah, and then for the ones who never served San Diego landed seafood, it ranged from 0 to 18 kilometers. So as it got further away, less seafood restaurants would serve local.
I have a question.
Okay.
So you said that you surveyed or you were going to survey over 100 different seafood restaurants. And I know that you called a lot of these restaurants.
Yeah.
Were the managers there, or the people that you talked to, really eager and willing to answer these questions on your survey? Or could you talk about that?
I called 145 restaurants twice each, and 62 of those completed the survey. Some were very hesitant. Interestingly enough, a lot of the Asian restaurants did not want to disclose information, and sushi restaurants were a bit weary. So I think that would be an awesome follow-up project, is just highlight sushi restaurants in San Diego. Some were really willing, even ones that didn't even source San Diego seafood were just so stoked on the project. But I think it was a mix overall, yeah. Not horrible feedback. People are just weary. They want to know you're not going to use their name, the restaurant's name, bad reviews, and all that, so.